this segment, I want to talk about two key elements. What I think fails in terms of boards and what I think works. And these are obviously almost the opposite image of each other. First, in terms of what fails any board, any council. And number one, I think, is a lack of commitment to serve the membership. If there isn't an underlying sense of what's the purpose, why am I here, and if that's not answered by the comment, I'm here to serve others, I think you're at the wrong table. You're better off sort of withdrawing your services and deciding to do something else than to be at this table because you have one vested interest, you have one personal agenda, you have a lack of commitment to serve others. Your job, your focus, your objective should be, how do we utilize this opportunity to make the lives of our membership better? Secondly, one of the things that goes off the rails is playing silly games with each other on the board. I get called in too frequently because board members or council members are at each other over all kinds of ridiculous kinds of situations, some of which have gone back, by the way, to childhood when they used to play ball against each other back in grade school, to now simply seeing their schoolyard problems as in a larger circumstance where they're now serving on a board together and they still can't stand each other. And so you've got people playing silly games, trying to undermine each other's point of view and so on. All that does is harm the board as a whole because of the immaturity of one or more members. Thirdly, sometimes people can use positions of power to manipulate others. So the person that's the president of the organization can use that role, regardless if it's a voluntary organization or not, to manipulate those around them. I think that's highly unfortunate, but it's often what could happen and undermines the effectiveness of the overall organization. Next, you can have organizations or boards that have no future planning. It's like they have no sense of direction at all. Everything's good. Everything's fine. Issues are repeated. Agendas are sloppily put together. There's no sense of where to from here. It's like we're simply the gerbil on the wheel. We're repeating everything we've always done before, and nobody's asked the question, so where are we going with this? Another challenge is the focusing on personalities, that we're so interested in taking a shot at each other that we lose sight of the overall perspective of the organization as a whole, that members of the board focus on petty issues rather than focusing on the larger agenda. This can happen around ethical kinds of issues where you have challenges on people that are in the organization for the wrong reason. They're challenged over their own ethical behavior, and as a result of that, they may well be making poor use of the organization or the board's resources. In terms of what also fails with regard to boards is that the board meetings themselves can become very stressful. You can have meetings that are so much marked by angst within the organization that people dread going to meetings. They don't like what they see at the meeting. They realize that their relationships are poor and so on, and as a result of that, the board simply doesn't function the way it ought. If the tone at the top is characterized by lack of trust, sometimes that lack of trust emanates from the fact that the board executive has lost touch with its own members. And as a result of that, they disregard the input of members, they disregard the need to connect with members, they don't communicate as effectively as they should. If a member contacts them, they see the member as being out of step, as not a team player and so on. And as a result of that, the board itself or the executive becomes isolated. That becomes a major flaw of a ongoing organization. Ironically, not only is that a failure of a board, but also the fear of failure causes board members to suffer. You end up having board members that have no willingness to change. They want to stay with their tried and true methods. They aren't prepared to look at any innovative ways of doing new business. And as a result of that, they run the risk of eliminating the opportunity for improvement. And I would suggest to you that you need to always be the kind of organization that says, if we have a society around us that's changing, how in actual fact are we reflecting change within our organization? Another one that causes struggles is the misunderstanding of roles. I've jokingly said if it wasn't for the words role clarity, I've been out of business 35 years ago. In some ways that's true, because I get called in frequently because mayors and councillors on a municipal stage, board chair and board members and board CEO on a crown agency or not-for-profit organization stage struggle in terms of who does what. And so it has to be very, very clear in terms of the role statements ascribed to each of these particular positions. You also have what I describe as the power of one, where the chair or the CEO will take on the responsibility of the whole organization and presume that they're the only person that's going to have any impact on the decision making. As a result of that, the decision making style becomes overly autocratic. You also have organizations or boards that struggle because of the absence of respect. And sometimes the lack of respect shows up at the table. Sometimes it shows up in emails that go back and forth or electronic communication. Sometimes it shows up in the lobby of an arena where board members are gathering on a particular purpose, or in the farmer's market or wherever it is. There's not the kind of respect that there should be between board members. And ironically, and one that I use to close off with, as the organizations that struggle and boards that fail, is this whole issue of contentment. When you have a board that's happy with where they're at and is not looking to improve, I'll tell you that they're not far away from failing. They're simply getting themselves into a rut. And as somebody once said, the distinction between a rut and a grave is only its depth. And as a result of that, you have organizations that fall too easily, too readily into the rut of contentment. Now, let's flip that over and say what works. What makes for a sound organization? I'd argue, number one, and I've talked about this already, you need to have sound bylaws. You need to have bylaws that are unassailable, bylaws that absolutely and adequately set out what the organization is about, what it's attempting to achieve, who's expected to be at meetings, membership, all the kinds of elements that a board bylaw should have. Those should be up to date, they should be clear, they should be made available to the membership. Need clear roles and authority. Who does what at meetings? Who has the power to act between meetings? What power does the executive have? All of that should be clear. That's a key element of what works. You need to have well-run meetings. And that simply means that you have an organization that has good rules of procedure. They aren't overly onerous. They're written by you, so you don't have to rely on Robert's Rules of Order, anybody else's Rules of Order. The Rules of Order that should apply to your meeting are your Rules of Order if they're effectively done. They should be agreed upon procedures. You should have ongoing identification of new members. Who are the people we're trying to attract into our organization? What kind of skill set do we think we need? Who's out there that we would like to tap on the shoulder? All of that makes for an effective organization. We should also ensure that we not only orient today's members, that we consistently and continually look at our orientation process and say, how can we improve it to make sure that we're better orienting the next members that come in? How can we improve our orientation year over year? That it requires, in some respects, ongoing training, that we allow our board members to attend training courses, training seminars, or video sessions like this, where you have a chance to learn more about what it means to be a board, an effective board, or an effective board member. And we also have what I describe as the commitment to agree agreeably, that you learn how that you can function together, you learn how to disagree in an agreeable fashion, you can voice an opinion, and you can ensure that people's particular positions are understood and respected. You have an organization that has sound financial practices, that financial information is presented at each meeting, that each meeting you have the annual fiscal report, you have a monthly report, you have a variance report which compares today's statement over the prescribed budget or the approved budget, so you have a good, sound fiscal snapshot of the organization. An effective organization and an effective board is also characterized by the presence of sound, what I call protocols. Some would argue they're policies. Protocols say to me, how do we run things? How do we keep things running in an effective fashion? So what are the protocols that should characterize your organization? I would suggest you should have something written with regard to nepotism, because it's come into so many organizations over time. What do we do to ensure that our board does not encourage or promote or allow the hiring of staff members who are related to board members? These communities are small enough that you don't need to make them any smaller at your board table by having board members who in actual fact supervising their own family who are running a particular facility on behalf of the board. So that's one. Second would be the access to facilities? What's our protocol? Do you as a board member have a key to a facility that you have and nobody else does? What gives you the authority to have access to facilities that might be owned corporately by your entire organization? How do you treat each other? That's a protocol. Do we treat each other with civility and maturity and friendliness and collegiality and respect? Or do we do the opposite? What's our protocol around that? What's our protocol with regard to ethical behavior? Not only with regard to conflict of interest, but with regard to pecuniary interest, with regard to bias. What's our protocol in terms of ethical behavior? How do we handle corporate business from an ethical perspective? Do we have a protocol that covers risk management? How we identify risks in the organization that might prove to be a threat, and what we do to impact risk management strategies that negate those particular risks? Do we have a protocol around primacy of the table? Do we have a protocol that says that decisions are made at this table, not in the parking lot, not after the meeting, not before the meeting, but rather at the table? There should be a protocol that states that. Do we have a protocol that talks about how decisions are made and how clear that those decisions are made in a certain process of decision making? We should have a protocol around full disclosure of information. Nobody should get up from the board table and find out after the meeting that there was more information available, critical information on this topic. And also that we have a commitment to serve the membership of this organization. That should be a protocol that drives how we think, how we feel, the fact that we're committed to the overall well-being of the organization. The American philosopher Walter Lippmann said, "I would presume the public interest to be what people would do and what people would choose if they saw clearly, thought rationally, and acted benevolently." And I presume that every board that I'm talking to today is exactly that kind of board, that you're there to make good choices on behalf of the people that you represent. This is a high calling. It's a high calling in every community to serve in a volunteer capacity on an organization who provides an awful lot of good to the community. It builds up communities. It makes a community well worth living. It identifies and distinguishes community one from the community two. It's a choice people make in terms of where they live based on what caliber of volunteers do we have in the community? What kind of people do we have serving this community? I would argue that your board can have a huge impact on how people choose to live in your community. I wish you well. I think what you're doing is absolutely fundamental to the democracy that we enjoy in Canada today. And without the kind of commitment that you are exhibiting, we would be much the poorer for it. So congratulations, thank you, and I trust that these videos will have been helpful to your board and how you function effectively as a collegial body.